I think this is the culmination of what's been a pretty exciting and interesting career. I joined 34 years ago. I was in the inaugural class that went through the Defence Force Academy in Canberra. I have gone on to become a seaman officer. I trained as a mine warfare officer initially, and then I became a principal warfare officer. My operational experience was I was the operations officer in HMAS Sydney. We went to the Middle East just after September the 11th. I was on board a New Zealand ship on exchange as a principal warfare officer there. We did Interfet off East Timor, and I came back and I had my first sea command in HMAS Fremantle, a patrol boat based out of Darwin. And we did the operations in the Solomon Islands, Operation Help and Friend, and I then went on to command the Navy base in Darwin, HMAS Coonawarra, and I was the head of operations up in Darwin doing border protection work, and then after that I was in command of the HMAS Success. Since then I've been the Director of Navy Security and Police as a captain, and I've now assumed command of Stirling early this year in February, and I'll be here for another 2 years from now. We have often discussed what a commanding officer is because it's such a varied job. I liken it to being the chief operating officer of a big company. I'm also the mayor. I'm also the head judge. I'm also the head person who looks after people's welfare, so I look after their HR. And my real role at the base is I only command a very small number of people, but I run the whole base. So I'm the commanding officer of HMAS Stirling, but I'm also known as the senior ADF officer for Garden Island. What that means is that if there's a crisis, I will step up and I will take command of the whole island. That includes Henderson as part of one of my responsibilities. I will command the response to the emergency, whatever that is, a bushfire, a terrorist attack. Once that's finished, then I hand back command to all the various different units and they go on and do their own business. I'm also the Superintendent of Naval Waters, which means that I look after all the waters around Garden Island, which entails looking after where we put our buoys and what other people can do in that water. So it's such a varied job. This is my fourth command, and I can't think of a better job to be doing. It's a people job, it's an operations job. My job primarily is to support all the operations on the western side of the country. I'm going to start with a little bit of history because one of the reasons why we exist where we are is right back to 1827 when Captain Stirling came across here and was looking up this river that we stand on right now for potentially a place to set up a city. He actually came up with a bunch of strategic requirements for what he thought the city should be, because he was also looking at Albany as an alternative. He was also looking further north, and he was even looking around the Darwin area. What he wanted a base that was fronting directly onto the Indian Ocean, primarily so that the people here could influence what was happening out in the Indian Ocean, but also far enough away from, in those days, the Dutch East India Company, for example, that were up in the Southeast Asian region, the French, and they were able to set up a base here which was far enough away but close enough to influence what was happening in the Indian Ocean. So go forward now through to the 1980s. There was a decision made that we would set up a small base here on the west side of the country, and then later on it got caught up with, and that started, so we started developing the base in 1978, and it was a small base in those days designed just to support a few ships. Then the government looked at developing a thing called the two-ocean policy. The idea being that there would be half of the major surface combatants in the west and the other half in the east. The idea being that if there was a problem in one or the other area, we could still deploy a fleet. So in 1987, the government came up with the idea of a two-ocean basing policy. So once they made that decision, they then really started to ramp up what was here at Stirling. They brought more ships across here, and we are now half of the major surface combatants of the Royal Australian Navy. What we have is 5 Anzac-class frigates, and we have a large tanker, the HMAS Sirius. We have all of the submarines are based out of Stirling. And we also have a clearance diving team 4. They do underwater battle damage repair, and they also do undersea mine clearance. So we have half of the major surface combatants, the other half are over in Sydney. We have the patrol boats based up out of Darwin, and one of the reasons why we are slightly more strategically important than Darwin is because of that distance. We are far enough away that we have time to be able to do things like major work on our ships, major refits. It's one of the reasons why this is such an important place in World War II, and that role hasn't changed. We've extended our reach across to Henderson, so Henderson is now doing a lot of our heavy maintenance, a lot of our sustainment work of our frigates. The Anzac class will be remaining training here for the rest of their life. But we'll also be starting to use this as a base to, as we have done recently, to surge out into the Indian Ocean. So we just earlier this year sent a task force across to India who started their deployment in the whole Indian Pacific area from here. We also are able to support operations out into the Indian Ocean, such as, for example, when the Malaysian Airlines 370 crashed in the Southern Ocean. We were the ideal place to set up a task force, and we ran it out of HMAS Stirling. So that function is going to continue into the future, and as the region becomes more dynamic, what we have here are a whole bunch of natural advantages which were as true back in Captain Stirling's day as they are today, and they will be true into the future. So I guess I'll just jump back one moment, and what we're just about to finish now, which started back in 2017, is what I call a half-life refit of the base. So this is a redevelopment which is setting up all of the support structures that we have on the island, such as power, water, sewerage, etc., to be able to allow us now to start building all of the new capability. The first of the new capability that's coming in will be related to our new replenishment ship. Just as an aside, I was the person who wrote the capability requirements to take it to government to argue the case that we should be buying this particular class of ship, which we will call the supply class, the Cantabria, the Navantia ship. That's going to be one of the first things that we will see happening at the base, is the infrastructure that's required to support that ship. So we'll be extending things like the ammunition wharf so that that ship can come alongside. We'll be extending a bunch of facilities, and we'll also be building a new control centre which will control all of the internal management systems of the ships, because we're getting two of those ships. The first one will be based in Sydney, and the second one will be based at HMAS Stirling. The next project that we're going to see will be related to the offshore patrol vessels. Two of those, the first ones are going to be built in Adelaide, but the next bunch of those ships will be built here in Henderson at that new CIVMEC facility, which is now a great, fantastic beacon. We can see where Henderson is quite clearly now from the island, and that's going to be a project that will deliver two of the offshore patrol vessels, the Arafura class, to the island, and there will be a bunch of training facilities set up for them, support facilities set up for them specifically to look after that particular type of ship, and we will have two, as I said, based here at Stirling. The next thing that we'll be preparing for is the C5000 project, which is the Hunter class frigate, which will replace the Anzac class frigates over a period of time. Those are bigger ships, and they are going to be quite capable ships, and we will also likewise have the facilities ashore to do training and to support them when they're alongside. So we will run all of our support and sustainment out of Garden Island and also Henderson. So Henderson's also part of this redevelopment of what's happening on the base. It's part of the collective whole. So there will also be a facility set up at Henderson, which will have about 500 people working at it, which will be looking after the sustainment of the new Hunter class, the offshore patrol vessels, and will also take the Anzac class through to its final retirement in about 10 years' time from now. Obviously, after that, there's the next big project which is coming, which will be the C1000, which is the submarines. I'm not going to try and guess. I will say that we are going to have at least 6 of those submarines based here in Perth, and there will be a whole bunch of facilities which will be associated with that new submarine as well, including a big training centre which we built right next door to the training centre for the Arafura class and also for the Hunter class. So over the next decade, then the base will be growing, anywhere from between 1,000 to 1,500 extra uniformed people. So we have 3,600 people working on the island now. That includes civilians, APS, contractors working directly for Navy, plus all of the uniformed people. We'll be growing that workforce over the next decade, up to about 1,500 people. We'll also be spending over the next decade anywhere in the order of $1 to $1.5 billion worth of infrastructure on the island. Now, I'm not going to try and guess because those projects are yet to be approved by the Public Works Committee. The detail will come out in due course. But as an example of what the local community can expect, the project that we're finishing now, which is $360 million to develop the base ready for this new capability, $80 million of that was spent in Rockingham alone through local contractors there. So there's going to be a massive increase in what is already a very tight relationship with the local community and also the broader shipbuilding community and maritime community in Western Australia. We have an excellent relationship, for example, with the South Metro TAFE. that relationship is going to grow as we bring more sailors in. We're bringing in new capabilities, and there's a lot of really nice synergies going on at the moment with the South Metro TAFE and also the local shipbuilding industry as well. I can't get into the specific details yet because it hasn't gone to the Public Works Committee, but there are some generic indicative figures. The indicative figure over the next decade for those projects that I said, so not including the submarine project, is about $1.5 billion worth of infrastructure. So that's not including the ships themselves, that's not including the sailors. But as I said earlier, when we grow the workforce by an extra 1,500 people, they need somewhere to live. So the impact on the Rockingham community will be large and growing in a positive way, because what we'll be doing is bringing in more people who will want to live in the area. Rockingham is one of those areas where it's now becoming a very attractive place to live for our sailors and officers because it's so convenient to the base. The facility that will be built at Henderson, for example, will be a common user facility which will have up to 500 people, uniformed people and APS, public servants, who will be working in that one building at Henderson. That's not including the ongoing sustainment work which will continue to grow as the new ships come into the Western Australian region. So the Arafura class, for example, will be getting built in the CIVMEC facility. The Arafura class is going to need to be maintained at that facility. So there's work there which will last well into the future, and I'm talking decades. So the figures will become clearer as the Public Works Committees agree to what we're going to spend. But as I said, $360 million on the work that we've done already, $80 million of which went into the Rockingham community alone, and a large proportion of that, so we're talking about 150 million plus, went to Western Australian contractors to provide that work. Some of it was for new gear which had to come from overseas, but the vast majority of that went to the local Western Australian community and the workers who were doing the work here. I think history rhymes, if I can steal the phrase. And if you go back to Captain Stirling's time, all of those strategic reasons for why this base and why the city was important are still just as true today. So this location is in a moderate climate, which has got a large community to support it, which is vital to what we do in sustainment of our ships. It's also vital in supporting the people that work in the Navy, because we all have families, so we need to be able to make sure that they are very happy about what we're doing in our service. So a big city like Perth, a lovely place to live, it makes it easier to keep our people in. But the ability to project power out into the Indian Ocean from a distance far enough south that we can influence what's happening in the region without being unduly influenced in return. I think that's the easiest way to try and explain it. This is why this base will always be important, and this is why this will continue to grow in importance, because this is a safe, secure site which we can fall back to, repair our ships, repair our people, and then turn around and go back out and do whatever it is that we need to do. It's a site that will support the fleet from the East Coast, and it's also going to be a site that will support all of our allied nations as well. So we will regularly host. In fact, as I speak to you right now, we have a bunch of allied nations who are across at Garden Island who are about to do a submarine search and rescue exercise. In a week's time, they'll be doing a mine warfare exercise. And this is just what we do because we're in the right place to be able to do it. So into the future, this place, I think, will grow in strategic importance simply because of its location, and also because the city around it is ideally set up to be able to support this type of operation. Major railheads, major airports, major port like this, and that's all the stuff that we need to be able to run operation.